North Georgia about 3 weeks ago, covering the Masters. Was that the first time you've covered the Masters?
It was the first time I covered it as a reporter. I had won the fan lottery actually in 2018 and was able to. Me and my dad were able to go for one round. We went for the Thursday round in 2018, but I had never been other than that day. So it was pretty cool to stay all week and cover the event.
Hold on a second. You won tickets in the lottery to an actual round, not just a practice round? I'm not sure I've ever actually heard somebody that won actual round tickets.
Yeah, it was. Well, you get the option. At least when I did the lottery, I got the option for 4 practice round tickets or 2 tournament round tickets, and I picked both, like either or.
Check all the boxes.
Yeah, I ended up winning the actual tournament round.
Well, that's pretty awesome. So what was it like covering it? Anything you can do to kind of take us behind the scenes as to what that experience was like?
It's hard to explain, right? It's hard to put into words. It was incredible. I mean, the place is everything that you kind of hear about. It's just this majestic place where it feels like every blade of grass is perfectly straight and beautifully green. It's really a wonderful place, and it's like going back in time too when you're on the course, because there's no electronics, of course, and can't have your phone, and there's $1.50, $2 for a sandwich, a pimento cheese sandwich or egg salad sandwich. So it's a lot of turning the clock back as well. So it's just really cool event overall, and then to work in the press facility, which they're very secretive at Augusta, so I don't know how much they spent, but the estimates are about $40-50 million on this facility, and it's incredible.
Yeah, it really is a neat setup. All right, I want to get into your story from yesterday, but I want to actually ask you about a quote that was in your colleague Pat Forty's story earlier in the week. You've covered college football playoff expansion so much. You've covered the work that has been done with Greg Sankey and Jack Swarbrick and Bob Bowlesby and Craig Thompson. For Swarbrick to come out when kind of asked about the idea that Greg Sankey had kind of dragged Texas and Missouri to push for playoff expansion, and the words where Swarbrick said that was complete BS and Greg Sankey was a smart guy, but not even he is that Machiavellian. What did you make of that? Because I thought that was incredibly revealing and rare for a college football official, an athletics director at that level, to say something that blunt publicly.
I think there probably is a lot of frustration behind that, behind those comments, all of those comments from Jack Swarbrick. It was probably high time for a leading college football official like him to finally say something that has been bubbling up within the industry for a while now, and what we kind of all have assumed is going to happen, and that's the split, with the high, especially with NIL here and the collectives, with the top 20, 30, 40 programs splitting off and running some kind of more professionalized type of league. It feels like that. And then for him, I just think it's a lot of frustration in dealing with the CFP expansion process that failed, obviously, over the last year. I know just from talking to Jack that he's been very, very frustrated by it. He was one of the leaders in the subcommittee that created the 12-team expansion proposal, and it seemed like it was well on the way last summer or so to passing, and then there were few roadblocks, right? And all fall and then into the winter, it became clear this wasn't going to pass. And I think there's a lot of frustration. I think that's where it's coming from.
So you wrote yesterday about this seismic shift that is potentially on the way at the Division I level, and kind of tied it into Mark Emmert's, air quotes, resignation from the NCAA. There's so much to unpack here. We probably don't have time to do all of that immediately. So, of some of the things that you outlined, possibility of eliminating scholarship caps on sports, abolishing the limitation of number of coaches on the field, expanding direct payments to athletes directly from schools, changing the recruiting calendar, all of those things. What strikes you as most likely, maybe the fastest? Or is anything going to happen fast?
Well, the Transformation Committee has a deadline of August, but I wrote it in there. It's been pretty made clear that they might be doing this in the two parts, and they're not going to have all of these concepts ready to go in August. I think you'll see some of them, probably these that I wrote about, because these are the furthest along. I would assume these are the furthest along, since they're socializing them like they did this week in Dallas in a room full of about 60, 70 athletic directors. They presented all these concepts and ideas, which are somewhat radical, and a lot of ADs were stunned. But that's where we're heading. We're heading, I wrote about it back in January from the NCAA convention. We're heading for a deregulated, decentralized NCAA, where legislative decisions, big legislative policy is going to be sent down to the conferences to decide. So if the conferences want to have as many scholarships for baseball, for instance, as they want, they can make that decision now. It's not some kind of wide-ranging, broad NCAA legislation. Richard, I know there in the state of Mississippi how important college baseball is, and it's a good window into this issue. 11.7 scholarships for a roster of 35 in baseball. Well, the SEC and in the ACC and some other schools and conferences have fought for a while on expanding that 11.7, but they were kind of held back, right, by the low-resource schools who don't often, pour money into things like baseball. Some schools don't even have baseball, right? And so you're going to see conferences in schools maybe that kind of pour money into certain areas in sports, and you're gonna see a lot of conferences do different things because of finances, and that's where we get to the point where all of these things are only probably widening that gap.
So, Ross, what's the approval process to get something like this done? Is there enough potential for, let's just use the SEC as an example, to say, okay, fine, if you don't approve this, we'll take our ball and go home? And that's kind of like the ultimate trump card. Or is there a different way to get some of this stuff approved and in a timely fashion?
Well, it's a great question, and nobody really has the answer. I was asked how these things get approved, and I was told, well, that is, quote, murky. So
Great.
They don't even know really how these new changes will be approved. I think the thought, and I kind of wrote it in there, the assumption is that they'll have to go through kind of normal legislative path, which is a D1 council would have to take it up and vote on it, and then it would go from the D1 council to be approved by the Board of Governors. So I think that's probably the steps that have to happen, and I think you could see a lot of their concepts, maybe some of these, happen in August and be deregulated, and then from there it's a big step for the conferences. This is a lot like COVID, right? You remember the COVID regulations? The NCAA really had none. They didn't do any COVID regulations. They did some guidelines and suggestions, but each conference made their own COVID type decisions, and it's the same thing here. We're just going to have that with pretty much everything NCAA-wise. It's going to be up to the conferences.
So I guess my ultimate question is, are the smaller schools who don't necessarily have the ability to fund some of these initiatives, are they going to be able to put up a roadblock to slow down? Do you have time to hang for another segment, or do you need to run?
Yeah, I have time.
Awesome. We got the music starting right now, so maybe 30 seconds, and then we'll come back to a couple more questions that I've got for you after the break. Do the small schools have the ability to put up a roadblock here, or are the big schools going to be able to railroad it through?
No, this is, that was the issue, right? That's what's led us here, is that small schools have put up roadblocks for the big, powerful, rich schools who want to spend more of their money, and
Right.
they've been handcuffed. In this situation, no. If the small schools put up roadblocks, Richard, and I wrote about this back in January from the convention, you can guess what will happen. It is the Power Five threatening to just leave.
There you go. All right, more with Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated after a quick timeout. Sports Talk Mississippi streaming at supertalk.fm. The show on the C Spire text line at 601-879-4395. Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated, kind enough to give us a few more minutes this afternoon. Bunch of issues to unpack in his story yesterday from Sports Illustrated. If you have not read it, but if you have not read it, I would encourage you to do so. There is a lot there. We talked a lot about a lot of it yesterday. Mark Emmert's resignation, firing, however you want to describe it. So with all of the uncertainty of what the NCAA is going forward, Ross, let's just start there. Is this an appealing job, and what is this job going to entail, president of the NCAA, in the coming years?
Well, that's the real question, right? You kind of hit on the better question is not who, but what. Like, what is the job? Not who will be in the job, who will replace Mark Emmert, but what is the job? What is the NCAA, right? I mean, not to go too far back, but the NCAA's been losing power for two reasons for 40 years. Since the 1980s, when conferences, through a Supreme Court ruling, got control of their media rights and started making all the TV money.
Yep.
And ever since then, through antitrust losses in court, and the media rights deal being stripped from them, the NCAA just continued to lose power and authority. And the pandemic, plus the NIL stuff that's happened, has the NCAA in a situation where, it's now purposely transforming into a less an entity that is somewhat worthless, in a lot of ways. The NCAA was always there to kind of monitor the rules and enforce the rules that conferences got together and created, and was there to put on championships. And now it's losing authority, and the conferences are going to, like we said earlier, going to start legislating things. So it just continues to lose power, and the conferences continue to gain power and gain money. So it's just like, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey was asked yesterday at the CFP meetings in Dallas if he would be interested in taking the job. And obviously, I think as a reporter, you have to ask that question to him, but it's laughable, right? It would be an incredible step down. The SEC is way more powerful and is going to be way more powerful than the NCAA. And you got to ask yourself this: how long even will the NCAA be around, be an entity?
Well, and that's where I was going to go next. I mean, pretty strong argument to be made that Greg Sankey is the most powerful man in college athletics in his current role, and he would cede a significant amount of that power if he were to entertain the idea of being the president of the NCAA. But again, it's like, to do what? I mean, is there any scenario where the NCAA's member institutions could give enough power to the right person at the head of that organization to try to kind of pull things back together? Or is that just an impossibility at this point?
Yeah, at this point, it's tough because, like I said, I mean, you've got basically the NCAA, monitors the 30 categories, and they're about to have one of those categories get sent down to the conference level, all the legislation. And then you're going to have another category, the enforcement, maybe the biggest thing they do besides putting on championships, that might be pulled from them too. So it's like, you're president of the NCAA. Well, so you're the president of an entity that just runs championships. That's it. The conferences can put on championships. Heck, So I think we're heading to a place where the NCAA probably is not going to exist anymore. It might not exist in 8 years, 12 years, 15 years. In what you might have will be probably, like we discussed on the last segment, there's going to be division and split probably, and you're going to have somebody preside over those things. If you have the top 30 schools go off and make some kind of more professionalized like division, you'll have to have a leader there, and that leader will have a lot of power. It would be kind of like the CFP. Maybe the CFP takes over or something like that. So, yeah, the NCAA is not the NCAA presidency. I don't think, and you've already seen a few officials, not just Greg Sankey, but Washington State's president Kirk Schulz come out and say, no, I don't want that. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
So a complicating factor in what you're talking about, whether it's 8, 10, 12, 15 years down the road with the NCAA kind of disintegrating and conferences, big schools kind of taking their power, are the ever-present television contracts. And I think that's part of the reason that Jack Swarbrick, in the story that Pat Forty wrote, pointed to the mid-2030s as the time where maybe it kind of completely crumbles, because over about a 3-year window, you'll have the SEC TV deal ending, you'll have the ACC TV deal finally ending, and the Big Ten may not do a deal that's going to take them. They've tended to do shorter television contracts than the SEC has done as well. Is that the right time frame to be looking at, or is there a scenario where this thing blows up sooner rather than later?
Well, I'll be honest. When I did see those comments from Jack, and like I said earlier, I think it's refreshing to hear what's kind of been just said quietly in circles, said publicly by such a high-placed leader. So it is refreshing, but at the same time, I think it's a little conservative. I think mid-2030s, I don't know, a lot of people we talk to within college athletics might say by 2030 that we would have some kind of divide or split. Now, it could be tricky because of TV contracts and getting out of TV deals and TV contracts, so that could be a problem. But the way we're headed with NIL and the collectives and all this stuff going on, it's just, and then the transformation, you add in that, right? You add the transfer portal stuff. It's all becoming geared toward the rich schools in the Power Five, the top of the Power Five. That's the thing. And for your audience in Mississippi, might be really interested in this is the transformation changes with the unlimited scholarships and stuff like that, plus the NIL and the collectives. A lot of kind of industry insiders you talk to say that the split that needs to be discussed isn't necessarily Group of Five and Power Five, but it's the Power Five split, between the two. It's the top 20 or 30. And I had an AD yesterday read that transformation story and say, the number 30 through number 70 Power Five programs, which obviously Ole Miss and Mississippi State, I'm sure would fall in as far as resources and budget, they should be concerned, right? Those top 25 or 30 are the ones that this is all geared around. They have the advantage.
All right. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's where I wanted to ask next, and we'll finish right here. So you say Mississippi State, Ole Miss might fall into that 30 through 70 category, and I would agree with that in terms of success and cachet, etc. But Ole Miss and Mississippi State have both gotten to the point where their budgets are well over $100 million a year. And with the new money that's coming into the SEC, they're going to be closer to $150 million a year within a 6 or 7 year time frame. Does that not get them firmly into that group, even though some people would say, oh, well, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, they don't necessarily belong in the top 30, just by nature of their relationship with the SEC and the amount of money they're going to be making?
Well, it helps, right? I mean, if you're in the SEC and you're in the Big Ten, you're in good position, probably no matter what your school specific institution.
And that's 30 schools right there if all 30 of them were to go. I mean, maybe Northwestern, Vanderbilt less interested in who knows.
Well, and you look at just budgets alone, and I don't have it pulled up, but you're right. I mean, Mississippi State and Ole Miss probably are in the top 35 to 40, I would guess, maybe the top 30 in budgets right now. So Yeah, I mean, you certainly, it helps being in the SEC or being in the Big Ten, and when you look at those two conferences and everybody else, you start to put together teams, and how many teams outside of the SEC and Big Ten have a realistic chance of winning a national title? You know, with their resources and history, it's like 3 to 5. You know, I mean, Clemson, USC, maybe Oregon. And then you have trouble. You have Notre Dame. I mean, but then you have real trouble trying to find some others. Some might say Miami, but I mean, it's a very small list. So combined, the Big Ten and the SEC will have, once Texas and Oklahoma get in, I mean, they'll realistically have 90% of the teams that probably have the resources and history to win a national championship. I remember when the Texas OU news broke, and I went to the athletic budget list that USA Today does, and looked, and I want to say, you know, it's something like the SEC would have 11 of the top 15 budgets in college sports. It's incredible.
It is incredible. Ross, as always, great reporting. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon. We're always